This is the next chapter.
Welcome to Paradigms, a podcast by Leitmotiv, the independent digital policy think tank that exists to operationalize values in our digital future.
In each episode, we unpack the latest developments and debates in our digital world. Together, we try to make sense of what is happening to our digital future, who's shaping it, and what we can do to change its path.
My name is Zuzana Ludwikova, and I'm here to ask the difficult questions.
And my name is Max Schulze, and I'm here to give simple answers. At Leitmotiv, I think about the policies that shape our digital future and how to operationalize our societal values within them.
And my job is to bring our thinking to your ears, eyes, and minds. In our podcast, we invite you to think with us as we unpack the building blocks of our digital world and work towards a better future that amplifies the best of our core values and our humanity. Today's topic is the antitrust trial of Meta, with the US Federal Trade Commission centered around Meta's monopoly, where in 2020 the company got accused of restricting market competition after it bought social media platforms Instagram and WhatsApp in 2012 and 2014. Though the lawsuit was repeatedly dismissed in favor of Meta, the case still proceeds, and today, during the recording of this podcast, we are following the second day of the continuing trial.
As the world gets bigger,
obviously, the times today are a bit different. We see direct financial collaboration of tech companies with the White House and Donald Trump, and the rhetoric of these CEOs is changing as well. All of that during the blazing AI race. In the current trial, Mark Zuckerberg has even admitted that Facebook is no longer for personal social networking, but, and I'm quoting, more of a broad discovery entertainment space. Max, what is the most surprising or interesting thing for you about this case? And what are some useful frames to think about this?
I think what becomes clear is if we unpack Meta a little bit, I think what's nice to see also in his statement is that they're finally really acknowledging that actually they are not really a tech company. Like as a software engineer, for me, there's never been a lot of technology involved in building a social network or building, feeds like Instagram and things like this. It's becoming more and more apparent, and again, in his language, also becoming more clear that they're a media company. So historically, we can compare what's happening now a little bit what happened with News Corp in the United States, where they were allowed to continuously buy up newspapers and TV channels and other things. And you create a media conglomerate that eventually is so big that you can really use it to steer public narrative. And for everyone who watched the TV show Succession, I think it may be plausible that there are some incentives if a single person owns a very large global media conglomerate to sometimes steer the opinions into a certain direction.
Yeah, there's a succession plan for me and for all of our senior executives.
And so from that perspective, shrinking the media conglomerates in the case of Meta is probably a wise move. I think it has very little to do with the overarching vertical integration of other tech companies where they combine, very large infrastructure businesses in the case of Google Cloud or Azure for Microsoft or Amazon with AWS, where they become deeper and deeper integrated from an infrastructure perspective. Meta has never done that. Their strategy was always to go wider, so to acquire more channels, to acquire more media platforms. And it feels like their strategy was always about how do we control the majority of streams, news feeds, and how do we basically become the central gateway to consuming what's happening in the world. And I think with their acquisitions, they've become really successful at this. They have bought a lot of assets and they have become a critical part of communications infrastructure with WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger and even now chat in Instagram. So from our perspective, it's nice to see that this is being broken up. And I really just hope that there's an attempt to break it up. But it shouldn't stop there, because again, this is really about media and public conversations. I think we ought to have the same conversation about the real tech companies and breaking up their vertically integrated businesses.
That's interesting you say that, because OpenAI has also announced that they're building a social network. So there is this attempt to capture sociality in these online spaces. But maybe that would be the entry to the more diversified competition.
Yeah, I'm not sure if OpenAI gets into this race, if that leads to more diversified competition. I think social networks were one of the first disciplines in the tech ecosystem where you could observe really large network effects. So meaning that the more people use it, the even more people will come. And it just can grow exponentially without doing much. So I think a lot of people are excited about getting into that space. I think probably from an OpenAI perspective, it is rather that if you look at social media as a large scale factory, right? So there's people on one side who are producing free content all day, every day to get likes and clicks and interactions. And these workers, so to say, provide that labor for free. And then you have people rating that content for free by providing likes and interactions. So you have a very high performing content factory where you have almost zero cost of making and rating that content. And I think if I'm an AI company and I need a lot of qualified high quality training data, then building a social network, or should we say building a content factory with free labor, seems to be a very attractive proposition. So I think if OpenAI is thinking about getting into that race, I think it's rather because of that aspect, rather than really building a social network to connect people with each other or to reap the network effect benefits.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think this factory that you've just described is a very interesting metaphor when you think about the ad environment and this free labor that the users basically do in their free time, just scrolling and falling into rabbit holes. Because it is when users use social media for free, it is really hard to prove that this alleged monopoly harms consumers because through higher prices, because they're doing this for free. So what can ads tell us more about the critical points that are happening in this case?
I think ads validate the value of the factory, because these factories have become, let's say, the highest paying, like most of the advertising spend volume now goes into these factories. And they don't go there because the content is free or because the attention that people give is free. They go there because the spinning wheel is working really well. So the amount of content that's being produced and the amount of attention that amount of content generates is just very, very attractive. I mean, in advertising, you talk about eyeballs. How many eyeballs can I get, and how long can I get the eyeballs to stare at something? And in TV, that used to be, you have a 30-second commercial, a 45-second commercial, or you have a Super Bowl ad. Lots of eyeballs for a short burst. But in the social media factory, you can get eyeballs much more frequently and for much longer periods of time if you do it well, or if you pay a lot of money. So I think advertising just validates that this factory is working really, really well at mining people's eyeballs and attentions, and at the same time that the input costs are really free, and with that free input cost of making content, you get this tremendous amount of content that keeps this feed always moving, always up to date. Again, we are all laborers in that factory. Let's not forget about that. And the advertisers just really appreciate the pace and the scale of that factory.
Right. And it gets really tricky if these ad systems are very personalized and just know us, because in this way we sort of grew to like these ads. And some people would even say that they don't mind getting an ad for a bag that they've been looking for 2 weeks. So
Mhm. Sure. I mean, again, like what I said before is there's content coming in. We validate that content through likes, comments, interactions. And that verification information, of course, also reveals our interests and what obviously the button already implies that, right? What we like. And I think the real problem, and it's something that regulation could easily fix, is not per se us expressing these opinions and preferences, but it's the fact that the company, the factory owner, is allowed to sell our preferences to advertisers and allow them to bid on it. Ads will always be there. You know, a newspaper ad has been around for a really long time, and it is a business model that exists in our economy. But a very simple law that says the information about preferences and the interaction data is private would solve this, would at least solve part of the problem and make these ad businesses a lot less profitable. And one might argue that that could hurt, that would scale down the profits of a company like Meta to a degree that they would have to break up, or they wouldn't have the money to make all these acquisitions anymore. So I think from our perspective, it will be a lot more effective to simply protect the preference information of consumers, and this way readjust the business models, and the business model and the profitability defines what these companies can and cannot do.
Is there anything that users can do to sort of cut their own labor to stop it? For example, not liking or commenting, or is it really not effective and they have other ways to capture this data?
That's the big conundrum, right? So first of all, yes, there's other ways to capture this preference information. There's a Dutch researcher, Bert, who has actually built a tool that makes a computer make noise whenever a tracker tracks your mouse and things like this on any website on the internet. I think in his example, he just used Google's tracking code, and basically when he moved the mouse, the sound wouldn't stop. So they even now track mouse movements, the way you use your browser, and those are all go into this preference pool. So unfortunately, probably the advice would be to stop using the platforms altogether, but that's not really what people want to hear, and it's also not feasible. So I would rather say, we live in a democratic society. Take it into your hands. Write a letter to your politicians, and just let them adjust the business model so the incentive for collecting that preference data goes down. But more importantly, that the preference data cannot be monetized in a way it is monetized today, which leads to even more obscure ways of mining it. Because if, let's say, each preference that you make on social media is worth 1 cent, then of course I have an incentive to collect as much preference data as I can. Right? So if I can get 1 million data points on you for 1 cent each, that's 1 million cents. That's a lot of money already for one single user. And that just requires that the regulator adjusts the market environment, so the business model, that you can't make money with it. That's fundamentally, I think, what this is about. And I think that would be a very effective fix, at least from a consumer perspective.
Privacy.
And all these pressures around privacy risks, they are usually tackled by regulators, as you said. And from Europe, there's a lot of fines and limitations coming to tone down the basically US tech companies such as Meta or others. And even Trump says that they're unfair and steal from US companies. So we know that all of this is mostly coming from the Europe. And so my question to you, how different are these two environments of US and Europe when they attempt to control tech companies? And what is it that they're protecting?
I think there's one really important difference. I think when the US leaps into, so the US is generally not so much in favor of regulating, of course, but when they leap into action, they always take out a bazooka, right? So then you often get right into antitrust law, like let's break them up, let's shut them down. And Europe tries a more smaller scale iterative approach. I mean, the cookie banner is still a good example of this. It's a very small problem, tracking cookies, where we applied a lot of regulation to basically enable customers to choose not to have them. Yeah. But it's, so to say, Europe often does not take the bazooka out, because it thinks like, okay, we just make these tiny fixes and it will go well. But I think from a European perspective, we need to step up and really think about the business models that are behind it and adjust our regulation to basically influence how you can make money with the stuff. I think there we need to step up. We don't need to take the bazooka out, but at least we need to be more effective with our regulation, can be much more shorter, much more to the point, if we understand the business models well. And from a US perspective, I think the same can happen because the US really believes in innovation. And innovation comes from constraints. So regulating certain business models to allow or not to allow certain aspects of it actually creates a new constraint, which could, for example, lead a company like Meta to innovate and think about new ways how they can make money that are maybe more in line with also what consumers want and what privacy advocates stand for.
Right. Yeah, the cookies are very tricky because it's hard to find the good balance between not being too paternalistic, but also giving the user or internet user the choice to make their own decision. But if you already think about the way cookies were sort of misused or laughed at by the tech companies, or through innovation, they could sort of go around and put some dark patterns into there, and they could sort of go around the whole law, right?
Yes, correct. And it's a very technical regulation, right? You're trying to basically dictate that a certain technology shall not be used in a certain way. And you also create innovation. And the dark patterns are innovation in a way that somebody thought like, oh, well, then we just make the accept all button very big and green. You see the regulation created a constraint. You're not allowed to do this anymore. And then people innovate. Now, we just need to put the constraint on the business model and not the technology. And that's something that we as Europe need to learn, that, this is not a car where you can say the engine shouldn't have this much pollution, which is a technical regulation. But here we really have to say cars shouldn't be sold, cars shouldn't be given away for free and then financed by advertising running in the car, right? Because that could lead to people being distracted on the screen, having to look at all this advertising, or they can't navigate to where they want to go because there's this advertising. That if I say it like this, everybody's like, yeah, that we shouldn't do it like this. But in a way, when it comes to tech and most of the stuff on the internet, we do actually try to regulate the engine where it's pretty clear that the engine may not be actually the problem, but the way the product is sold is maybe the problem.
Mm-hmm. I think you point out very well on the issues around AI and digital literacy. So you said business models, but I think there's also a big issue around how these things are designed, or as you said, how they're sold, but also the way they look as the product that is being sold. And I think this connects to the way that institutional decision makers such as Trump administration or other big actors in this game who make big decisions sort of don't understand these business models or technologies. For example, I think also the judge who is deciding for the court case of Meta has never scrolled through TikTok or Instagram, and he's sort of having the main say in this case. So my question is, should justice institutions and policymakers and regulators have the consumer experience, or is it their objective detachment that is more beneficial when they are supposed to make the decision what happens to these digital tech companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think let's use an analogy again. Can you regulate steel making only if you've ever worked in a furnace? No, of course. And you can't know every single industry by heart, or be a customer of it, or having been an employee in it. I think that's very tricky as an ask. I think what we need to have though when I say steel making, I think a lot of people can at least imagine the basic process of value creation. What's the product is the steel, the technology is the furnace, and different types of furnaces, and the inputs are iron ore. So I think like most citizens can imagine this, most judges can imagine this and understand this. And when you say digital literacy, I think that's often misunderstood as something that only applies to consumers, teaching them how to use online banking or phones or whatever. I think it's really about what we really need to focus on right now is to give policymakers and judges and other people in this decision-making role a framework on understanding the components of the digital world. Of course, at Leitmotiv, that was one of our first pieces of work is to create that framework of thinking and acknowledging that, for example, a digital product like ChatGPT in the AI space, consists of a technology that is GPT, the actual model under it, but that then there's also a business model as well as computing infrastructure, or we call it digital resources, that are, so to say, the iron ore, they're the inputs, and the business model dictates how you monetize the technology. And just knowing these three components enables anyone to really act on those, because you're not just saying, we don't like that Meta is so big, but you really know like on which parameters of their business you can act upon. And I think that's really the literacy we need right now.
Yeah, you need to know the whole anatomy of the technology to truly know how it affects not only consumers, but their own operations inside the company.
Yeah, and also the incentives and how value is created. Again, smelting iron ore into steel, it's very simple value proposition, and it's a very simple way to see value. I think we have really a lot of public discussions about, again, let's stick with Meta, about the advertising business model. And we have a lot of opinions about, that's not creating value. But we also don't really understand what the value is now that is coming out of these companies. And I think we need to know that. And then why do we need to know that? Because we want to steer the creation of more value, or we want to adjust how the value is coming out into society and how we benefit. And to do that, again, we need to understand, you called it, the anatomy of the business. Very simple.
We will find out the answer to those questions.
So how can we capture this value? How can we spot it and not just think about it becoming more and more?
Yeah, I think at the moment that's a really complicated conversation, because the value posturing is driven by the companies themselves at a scale, I think that's unprecedented. I think when ChatGPT came out, the amount of press releases or ideas and articles of what you could do with AI, all these potential ways how it could create value, basically polluted the narrative of this, opportunism, all the stuff we could potentially do. And probably a lot of these things are potentially possible. But we've never had the conversation is that what we want? Is that good for us? And we don't have enough time, because we're pushed by the tech companies to be faster and faster and faster. We don't have enough time to really think this through, have a democratic process, survey citizens, have very large scale citizen engagement, and really first think about what is the value that we want to see as a society. And then the second question that comes after that is then how do we shape these businesses, the business models, the technologies in a way that we get that value out.
Yeah, I think we could also say that it is also part of their ideology of the Silicon Valley to see all the artistic industries or anything as a problem to fix, right? Not really as a process to go through to create products. Just a problem to fix that is quicker, that is more efficient, that saves money.
Yeah, I think the ideology is also that, politics and governments are slow and inefficient and things like this. But I think we have to remember that democracy is slow for a reason, because it has to bring everybody along on the journey. and it's a great equalizer. Also, for our constitutions demand equality in front of the law, and you need a participatory process, and that is inherently slow. And for tech people, and again, I was part of that community for a long time, that just feels really unnecessary and slow. What we learn is to push stuff out, test it quickly, and then scale. And that just runs completely counter to democratic process. And that's, I don't have an easy solution for this. But maybe we can also leverage some digital technologies ourselves in the more policy space to basically rapidly ask people which direction this should go, and basically increase the pace of democracy to match the pace of the digital economy.
And just a personal question out of curiosity, how is it when you had experience being in the Silicon Valley environment of that scaling thinking, and now in the democracy slowness type of place?
Yes, it's a very tricky question to answer in a politically correct way. I think it would do the civil society and nonprofit sector well to think about scale in a similar way, because we see the shift to the right in Europe and the US, and that's partly driven also by the fact that a lot of these parties are leveraging digital platforms better than other parties, for example. And I'm not saying that we all now need to get on TikTok, but I'm saying we can build tooling, we can build our own platforms where democracy can happen in a new era, which is in a digital era, and we can meet people where they are already and shift them into platforms where they can participate in shaping that digital future. And I think, again, technology is always neutral. It's what we do with it that really matters. And I think instead of being afraid or being totally against any form of digital technology, the question is rather, how do we use it to do good? And I really want to see, personally, the stuff that I used to work on, which is software, to be used to really maximize our well-being, to maximize how democracy works, and to really be there to do good and to enable good things. And I hope that the civil society sector can also embrace that mindset a bit more.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great way to end our first episode. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the great questions, Susanna.